Hi, Dad.
Hi, kiddo.
It's really nice to be doing a family update with you rather than about you.
Yeah, well, it feels like a good thing from this end of the universe as well.
Good. When was the last time you used a mic to record anything for YouTube?
It would have been last fall, likely early fall, maybe September.
Almost a year.
Yeah, a long time.
So,
Felt like a long time too.
it felt like a very, very, very long time.
Very long time. Yes.
Well, in the most Canadian fashion I can muster, what the hell happened, eh?
Right. That's what people were asking online. Eh? Right. What happened? Well, an accident is when 3 or 4 or 5 unlikely things happen at the same time. And I would say that's what happened. I mean, first of all, I spent last January with you in Zurich. I wasn't in the hospital, but I was there most of the time.
You were in the hospital a lot.
I was in the hospital a lot, yeah. Well, I had to feed you, or make food for you through all of January. And you were getting some pretty invasive surgery done on your foot. And then your mom and I, Tammy and I, went to Australia and New Zealand for most of February. And that was actually not too bad a trip.
Mm-hmm.
I felt all right. And she was feeling all right too. But we knew her surgery for what was hypothetically a relatively treatable cancer was coming up in March. So that was hanging over our heads, although we weren't overwhelmingly worried about it. And then she went and had her surgery. And then we were informed 6 weeks after that, after she had recovered but was still suffering some pain, that the easily treatable and non-dangerous, slow-growing malignancy that we were told she had was, in fact, something fast-growing with something near 100% fatality rate within a year, regardless of treatment.
Mm-hmm. Like brain cancer.
Yeah, so that was
deadly.
We were told that in about 10 minutes, and so when we were just expecting if not a clean bill of health, at least a representation of what we'd already been told. And then she went in to have more invasive surgery, and hypothetically that worked, but it created terrible side effects.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the start of a whole other 6 months long nightmare of trying to deal with surgical complications, which we did eventually resolve, but not until the middle of August. In fact, literally not until the day of our 30th wedding anniversary.
Yeah.
So that was all hair-raising and stressful, to say the least. I mean, you and I have talked about that, but we seemed to have a life-threatening emergency on Tammy's part for about every 3 days for about 6 months. And then I had my own problems start to develop really with any degree of severity in about April, May, something like that. I had been taking benzodiazepines since 2016.
So why, before we get into that, why did you start taking benzodiazepines?
Well, in over the Christmas vacation in 2016, you and I and Julian and my son and Tammy went out to Vancouver Island to visit her parents and siblings. And when we were there, you and I and Andre, your husband, ate something that didn't agree with any of us and
Sulfites.
Had a very severe reaction to that. We had the same symptoms. I don't know if I was any more seriously affected than you or not, but I was freezing cold for about a month. I couldn't get warm no matter how much I wore. I couldn't stand up without fainting. I couldn't sleep. I don't think I slept at all for something on the order of 3 weeks.
Yeah, people you went on Joe Rogan and talked about a sulfite reaction you had and how you didn't sleep, and people commented that, oh, it's not possible to stay awake for that long. But if you actually look into sodium metabisulfite allergies, the symptoms that we experienced aren't unheard of. There are papers.
Well, it's also impossible to stay awake voluntarily that long. That's not the same as not being able to sleep. Those are very, very different things. Whatever. It's possible that when I was laying there thinking I wasn't sleeping, that now and then I drifted off and would wake up and not notice. I mean, I can't eliminate that as a possibility, but I can certainly tell you that I slept little enough so that it was exceedingly unpleasant. It's a very long time to stay awake. And when we went back to Toronto, our family physician prescribed benzodiazepines, which are often used as a sleeping aid and an anti-anxiety medication, and something called Zopiclone, Imovane. And I hardly took the Imovane at all, maybe 4 or 5 times. But I took the benzodiazepine the way that it was prescribed, twice a day, 0.25 milligrams. And that seemed to bring the symptoms to a pretty rapid halt, which is also part of the reason I didn't need the Imovane. And then there were so many other things going on around me at that time that I never really thought about it again. You know, I thought that it was a relatively harmless drug, and I was taking it in a prescribed fashion at not too high a dose. And I developed symptoms that I now recognized were associated with its use. Weakness on my left side, and like a feeling of detachment from people around me, people I loved, some decrease in the ability to experience joy. But it wasn't until much later that I actually associated with the benzodiazepine use.
Yeah.
Well, when your mom got so sick, my anxiety levels had been climbing up again.
Well, yeah, that was unbearable. I mean, the response I had, if you're told your parent or your wife of almost 30 years has no chance and is going to be dead in the next 10 months. That's what we were told. That
Yes.
surgery doesn't help and that chemo doesn't help and that this is a fast-growing cancer and you're screwed no matter what.
Right.
That's what we heard in one day. So
Right.
yeah,
Well,
anxiety.
and then we went all over North America, to New York and to Houston and to LA, looking for different opinions before we decided to settle on surgery.
And everyone gave us the same opinion.
Yes, which was that nothing is going to help, but surgery was probably the best low probability bet.
Yeah. So
I asked my doctor to increase the benzodiazepine dose, but what seemed to happen as a consequence of that was that I just got more anxious. So again, in retrospect, it seems like I had a rather uncommon but not unheard of reaction to benzodiazepines, where increased dose makes anxiety worse instead of better. So then at one point, when things weren't getting better and Tammy was still in the hospital, I was trying to take care of her. We had lots of help. I stopped taking them entirely and tried ketamine, which is a treatment for depression. Well, neither of those were a very good idea as it turned out. So I had to stop taking benzodiazepines entirely to take the ketamine.
Oh, yeah.
Then I stayed off them for something approximating
it was a week.
Not knowing that was a very bad idea. And I often think I should have known these things because I did a lot of scientific research when I was a graduate student on alcoholism. And I knew that alcohol and benzodiazepines and barbiturates were all the same chemical class, at least in terms of their effect on neurological effects. But what I knew about benzodiazepines was that they were comparatively safe compared to barbiturates, which they basically replaced. But that's much less true than everybody who's taking them hopes. And they're very widely prescribed. And I don't remember what the probability of developing a dependency on them is if you take them for more than 2 weeks. It's 50%, I believe.
It's something like 50%.
Yeah, if you take them for 2 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, and over 4 weeks, it's much, much higher.
Right.
And most people prescribe them, stay on them for life. And that could have something to do with the fact that they're very difficult to get off of.
Yeah, well, it was unbelievably unpleasant. I mean, it was unbearably unpleasant. And so I started tapering off when Tammy was in the hospital, but I couldn't push that too fast because it wasn't bearable.
And what do you mean it wasn't
Well,
bearable?
my anxiety levels went higher than anything I'd ever experienced. And I also developed this condition called akathisia. And the best way I can describe that is that it was like being jabbed with something, with a prod, like a cattle prod, something electric or something sharp, nonstop for hours, for all the hours I was awake. It was absolutely, I couldn't sit or lay down or stop moving. And even if I did get up and move, it wasn't like that made it better. I just couldn't stop doing it. It was horrible. Akathisia is horrible. It's like being whipped. That's another way of thinking about it. Although I really think I would have, sounds melodramatic, but I think if I had to pick whipping or akathisia, I suppose it would depend on how big a whip. But it was plenty bad.
Yeah.
And so and things just fell apart more and more. Tammy recovered rather miraculously in the middle of August, but I continued my sort of downhill spiral and ended up in a clinic on the Eastern Seaboard that claimed they could do a rapid benzodiazepine detox, which was a complete bloody lie.
Yeah. Well, what we figured was we didn't realize that there was this physical dependency until you stopped to try and do the ketamine. And then we tried tapering and you couldn't stand it because of the akathisia. And so we thought, well, let's go get some professional help.
Right. And I went to the clinic on the understanding that they could do a multi-day detoxification and treatment for withdrawal. And when I got there, what they told me instead was that they'd substitute one benzodiazepine for another, which wasn't the least bit helpful because clonazepam was already a long-acting benzodiazepine, and they're easier to wean off than the shorter-acting benzodiazepines. And they had nothing to offer, essentially. I came out of that clinic worse than when I went in. So,
like significantly worse.
Yes.
On 2 more sedative-like drugs in order to dampen down the akathisic symptoms.
Right, which wasn't helping much.
Given the fact that the benzodiazepines were causing the akathisia.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and then I went back to Toronto.
That's November.
And things maintained their downhill trajectory, apart from the fact that Tammy was recovering quite nicely, which of course was great. But then I ended up in the hospital in Toronto, and the hospital I ended up in was also worse than useless.
Yes.
So, and I don't remember this part of it from December 15th onward. You and Andre, your husband, took me out of that hospital and we went to Russia, of all places, near Moscow, to try a treatment offered by a clinic there that used...
They used propofol and Dextor.
Right. Propofol as a heavy sedating agent, which basically made me unconscious for 9 days.
Yeah, so you were completely out for 9 days.
Well, I also had pneumonia, which I developed apparently in the hospital in Toronto. Well, yeah, it was quite entertaining, the whole string of events.
We got questions about, why on earth would you go to Russia when you could get, world-class care in North America. And the reason for that was because we had tried the Ashton protocol. Switching over to Valium, we tried the Ashton protocol, and lots of people have success with that, although it sounds horrible.
And lots of people don't have success with it.
Yeah, I put out the first family update we did was when you went to the first rehab center in the States. And after I put that out and said, this is what's going on, I had hundreds, if not thousands of people respond telling me how horrible benzodiazepine withdrawal could be, how they couldn't work, how they were pacing around their backyards for a year. And they basically said, just keep him alive, make sure he stays alive.
The psychiatrists that I spoke with said, when I asked them how long the akathisia was likely to last, they said, well, it could be 2 years. And I thought, no one could live like this for 2 years. It's like, you can't live for 2 years if you're being constantly prodded with something excruciatingly painful on a moment-to-moment basis. It's just not, and there's no escape, there's no relief. That's just not possible. It wasn't possible. The reason I did survive certainly wasn't because I was enjoying my life. The reason is that I had family that I was very attached to and friends who went above and beyond the call of duty, helping to care for me. But the experience was intolerably dreadful. And it's so strange because we're now in Serbia, weirdly enough, in Belgrade, of all bloody places. And we've been here about 2 weeks and went to yet another specialty clinic run by an anesthesiologist. And they modified the medication that I was taking in Florida, which is where we were last. And I don't know, I can't understand it, but virtually all my symptoms have disappeared. I'm still weak if I get up and walk around. I don't have my stamina, but I can think clearly. I feel I'm back to my regular self, such as that is during the mornings and during the days. I can work. It's very surprising to me that this happened so rapidly, but it has. And that's why we're doing this podcast or this video, but and hopefully it'll last. And Tammy is coming. I haven't been with her for more than a few days since middle of December. And that was partly because I was in bad shape and she wasn't in good enough shape to be patient with me.
She almost died like every day for 6 months, like you said. And you were suffering so much that anyone around you suffered.
Yes.
Because of how horrible it was to watch. It was horrible.